Hey, everybody. I want to say welcome to you. If you're new to the webinar, thank you for coming. And if you're a returning friend, well, thank you for coming back. I am coming to you today live from downtown Bellevue, Washington. So if you hear, sirens or cars driving by, it's because I'm outside, working at a client site most of the day today. So just popped out for lunch. It's noon here in Seattle, and I know you folks are all over the world, so it may be some other time there, maybe middle of the night. But hey, thank you for coming, and thank you for returning many times. I really enjoy doing these webinars. They help me continue to think a lot about what I'm doing and not just kind of do it because I know how to do it. That would be easy to fall into. So today I'm going to share some thoughts about Scrum in various different contexts, different elements of Scrum. If you're not familiar with Scrum, I'm going to give you a 30-second overview. You're going to see me pull it up here. All right, so in my recent file, to watch me browse around here. This is actually one of the slides from the class that I teach. Here we go. I use this slide a lot in the class that I teach. So Scrum is a project or product delivery framework that is very common. You know, version 1 does a survey called the State of Agile Survey, and in that they report lots of different information about Agile as we know it in the industry right now, mostly about their clients, obviously. But I use it as kind of a finger in the wind, kind of what's the weather like today from them, because they have a lot of customers. So it's a really interesting survey, and in that, in the past couple of rounds of that survey, it's been shown that about somewhere between 75 and 85% of the people out there doing Agile in one flavor or another are actually doing Scrum. So that's why I talk about it here. Hey, this thing's getting ahead of me. That's why I like to talk about it a lot, because there's a lot of misconceptions about Scrum and a lot of misuse of Scrum. Hey, look at that. All right, so the Scrum process, it's very, very simple, It's designed to make delivery of products and projects very easy. If you want to think about it, that it all starts with the customer. And representing that customer is something that Scrum calls the product owner. And that product owner thinks about what should this product that we're doing, and I'm going to get to the meat of what I'm talking about later, but some folks on the call, right, don't know Scrum, so I'm trying to help you. That product owner thinks about what is the customer going to want to do, what are they going to need to do with this product that we've got. So they come up with a big list of those ideas, and they put them on what we call story cards. The story card is very different from a requirements document in that it really is more of a promise of a conversation is how they call it. Each story card represents one little element of the product or project that you're working on, and they're as discrete as you can make them. They're just brief descriptions. So it would be things like as a customer of the ice cream shop, I would like to choose from 31 flavors so that I can pick the flavor that I like the most. And then you would go off later and talk about, well, what would those 31 flavors be? Why do you want 31 flavors? Why not something else? So here it is, the customer story backlog. So then the next most important element, and I don't know if you can barely see it there, is the team, right? So the product owner comes up with the customer story backlog, and then the team comes along and says, hey, that's great. We work in 2-week cycles, right? We call them sprints or iterations, but I'll just say cycles for right now. So we deliver working software every 2 weeks. So let me look at that backlog that you've prioritized, and it's all in priority order, right, from the product owner saying, hey, these are the things that the customer really wants first, and then these things, and then these things, all in order. So the team of folks who are going to work on that to build it come out and they say, okay, we're going to take these stories, and in this iteration or in this cycle, we think we can deliver on this one, or 2 or 5. And so they use a time box iteration or a cycle of somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks usually, and a daily stand-up or daily to-do kind of meeting where they coordinate with each other to talk about, okay, here's what we're doing. Here's what I'm doing today. What are you doing today? And how can we coordinate between us? So in that time box, then, they turn the idea that was in the customer backlog into some tasks. They work on those tasks throughout that little cycle of 2 to 4 weeks, and they actually produce 100% working code. So this is one of the things that really sets Agile apart. And this is one flavor of Agile is Scrum. And delivering frequently, delivering early, delivering often. Those are the concepts. And here you see this, they've delivered these 2 little boxes, and they finish them, and so they deliver them to the customer. The customer sees them. The customer may not be able to use the very first one because there's often a minimal viable product that you have to get out there in order to begin to actually get value for the customer. But you can show them this first feature and say, hey, this is what we've got. This is what we're doing. Do you like it? Do you not like it? And that customer then will provide you feedback. And then you just go through the cycle again. You pull off a couple more stories and potentially any changes or modifications that the customer had to what you created the first time. And you just cycle through again, again, and again. So that's the idea behind Scrum. And now I go back to my other slide deck and talk about some of the other thoughts about Scrum these days. So if you're familiar with Scrum, you're probably familiar with the term the Certified Scrum Master. And I wonder if any folks on this line right now even are Certified Scrum Masters. If you're a Certified Scrum Master, go over there and raise your hand on the side. There's a couple. All right. Did you know that they changed the Certified Scrum Master on September 1st? They did. So September 1st, the Scrum Alliance came out and said that there's a new testing policy. They actually are having a pass-fail test. So as opposed to in the past you had to take a 2-day class, a 2-day Scrum Master class from a certified Scrum trainer. You still have to do that. But they've raised the bar a little bit. It used to be that you would take a no-fail exam, and I use the air quotes around that. The no-fail exam was mostly originally there to help spread the word. It was just another learning tool for you to learn more about Scrum. It wasn't intended to test your knowledge. It was intended to be a learning tool at that time. And they have, I think, wisely chosen to make it actually a 35-question test. And you need to pass at least 24 of those 35 questions. It costs you $25 each time you take the exam to pass it. I mean, to retake it. So if you got 22 questions right, you didn't pass, and you'll have to go back and retake it. So you'll have to pay them another $25 and redo it. Very inexpensive as exams go. And well, it's also very short. 35 questions isn't very many, but Scrum is intended to be lightweight, so it's appropriate that there wouldn't be a ton of questions about it. It's supposed to be quick and lightweight and not too much trouble. Actually, I found just this morning, as I was out Googling around, found a great quote, and I wanted to see if it was here. Scrum. Here it is. This is from Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-creators of Scrum, and he says here that the requirement for the project management within Scrum was, when they were doing it in the early days at PatientKeeper, was less than 60 seconds per developer per day to update. So don't mess around with my time. I need to be busy doing work. But also acknowledging that, hey, you know what? Doing some of this updating of the tools and reporting does require some time. So 60 seconds or less per day. And less than 10 minutes per day for the project manager to complete reporting using all the charts and graphs. So that was a very interesting thing I found this morning, looking for other information. Happened to cross that. So it's exciting to me that they've made this bar that they have raised to have this required 35-question exam. I'm very excited about it. You take it online at test.com. And for more information about that, you can go to Scrum Alliance website and look for the new requirements for the Certified Scrum Master. If you just go to the Certified Scrum Master page, it'll tell you the new requirements there. And very exciting development in the world of Scrum. All right, other things that are going on. Working with a couple different clients. Taught a class last week over in DC, so I'm not sure exactly which person had this question or this scenario that they had dealt with in the past, but I wanted to talk about it here because I've heard about it a couple times in different teams, and I'm not sure how I feel on it yet. So I've heard of a couple different teams using points in a sprint instead of hours estimates. And that would kind of confuse me. The traditional best practice is you use, at least in my experience on this one, you use high-level T-shirt sizing kind of thing for stories that are way out in the future. When you start doing release planning, you start actually doing story points estimating using the Fibonacci sequence, all the way up through 20, 40, and 100 as the last three numbers, which are not standard Fibonacci sequence, but when you get that far out, they're too big to start to be accurate at all, so we just kind of jump up very quickly. So you use points there, but when you get into the actual sprint, you use hours. So the standard approach is you come to the sprint planning meeting, you come together and you talk about, okay, in this sprint we have Thanksgiving or some national holiday where we've got a day off. So instead of, if it's a 2-week sprint, instead of having 10 business days, we have 9 business days. And then you find out, well, so-and-so and the team has a doctor's appointment that's going to make them out for a full day. Another person is being a chaperone on their kids' for their kids' field trip at school and things like that. So you are reducing the overall time hours available to the team to make those estimates, to do that work, to do the work. And then you go and look at the stories that are in the backlog that are highest priority. You start grabbing those and breaking them down into tasks. What are all the tasks associated with this? And you give them a general hours estimate. And nobody's going to hold your feet to the fire on the hours estimate. But it's really only estimating the work that you're going to be doing in the next about 10 business days, or somewhere between 10 and 20. If you have a 4-week sprint, it's still 20 days. It's not that many. Right? It's a lot more than 10, but it's not that many days. So the idea is that, hey, you should be able to estimate hours on something that's that close to you. You're going to go put your hands on the keyboard any minute and start coding, and so that should not be that hard to estimate in hours that close to you. But I've heard other people say, well, we use points to estimate things within the sprint. And it just, I'm baffled as to why you would do that. Why wouldn't you do that? Well, one of the reasons is just what I was talking about. If you use points and don't use hours as the measure of work within the sprint, then when someone is out for a day and in a 10-day sprint, being out for a day is a lot, right? That's 10% of the work you can contribute. If you are one of 5 people on a team, that's a lot of work that doesn't get done, right? 10% of 1/5 of the team is a lot of work that's left undone. So I wouldn't want to use points because of that. And boy, my brain just froze. That's the main reason, though, is that you wouldn't be able to really accurately estimate the work that's going to be done in the sprint. Now, as a team is just starting, they're going to be fairly inaccurate anyway, but it's important to start to learn, right? Estimating is something we want to get better at, not something we want to hide. And if we're just using points to estimate, then you're not really estimating the work that you're going to get done. And somebody may argue with me on that point, and that's great. I'd love to hear why you would like to use points instead of hours. But every Scrum class that I've heard and been at, and every workshop that I've both led and attended, all always have hours in the sprint, hours in the work that you're doing within the time box that you started. I see that someone has a question. Does that mean sprint burn down is in hours and not points? Yes, it absolutely does. Sprint burn down is supposed to be, and this is an important one. Actually, I'm going to think that's the next one. Yes, to burn or not to burn. So this is a very important point. Sprint burn down is the number of hours remaining. Say that again. The number of hours remaining to deliver the work in the sprint. So at the beginning of the sprint, the team committed as a group to delivering a certain amount of work, and they estimated the hours on that work. And it was a guesstimate, right? And what a burn down chart allows you to see is your progress, not progress toward that, but your work remaining to deliver that, right? So let me explain that. If you're working and you're burning very close to the ideal line, right? So I have to pull this up so I can show people who aren't familiar with it. Planning methodologies and frameworks. Yeah, it's in here. This will help you. All right. So if this is a burn down chart, you can see that this team had estimated 250 hours for the work to take on January 1st of 2011. And then on the first day, they didn't burn anything because this day was probably sprint planning and they didn't finish anything by the next morning. That's not unusual. The next day, they burned some down, it looks like, came straight down here, and are down to like 200 points. So they burned a little over 50 points in that second day. Cool. And then they burned really even with the ideal line. This is not an unusual pattern to see. A flat line for the first day, quick, it may take a little longer or be a little bit further, but quick under the line here because people are working hard in that first sprint, or in the first couple of days of the sprint. And then it burns pretty close to the ideal line. This blue is the ideal. If the world was perfect, they burn quite even with that. But then something happens. And this is where the fact that it's the amount of work remaining is important, because a developer goes in and does a piece of work, and as they're working on it, they find out that what they thought was going to be a simple run-of-the-mill, if then else kind of piece of work is really a very complicated algorithm that's going to take them 8 more hours than they had originally planned. So they worked on it for 4 hours the first day, and it was a 4-hour task. So if we were just getting rid of, just marking down the amount of work done, then you would just mark down 4 hours. But you don't. You put in there the 8 hours of remaining work, the work remaining. So it looks like the person didn't do anything yesterday when they actually did. But they need to be comfortable with reporting the amount of work remaining, because that tells the true story to anyone who's interested in hearing it, like the product owner or other people along those lines. It helps them understand how we're really doing. And there's not this surprise at the end, oops, we didn't finish everything that we thought. You may not finish everything that you thought, but it won't be a surprise because you're updating the amount of work remaining, and thereby you're showing that we're off track because this is more complicated than we thought. If you're just putting down the amount of work completed, then it's going to map directly to that ideal line, and it's going to not give anyone any true information about where the project is, right? One of the great things about these Agile tools is the transparency that they provide and the information that people can get from that. All right. So that's what Burndown is. I wanted to talk a little bit about when to burn down and when not to burn down. Burndown is one of the 3 primary artifacts that are required in Scrum. Those artifacts are the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the Burndown chart. Okay? Nothing else is really required by Scrum as a document for executing work. So you should be able to get away with not using anything else at all. But sometimes we have other tools that we like to use. People like to use the Scrum board and that kind of thing. That's a way of representing the product backlog, but not really necessary. So the Burndown is an interesting piece of those tools, and I'm coming to a point where I may be saying to teams, and I'm still toying with this idea, that sometimes you don't need to do the Burndown. And the case where that would be if you have a small enough team, probably 7 or below, right? Seven development team members, testers, everybody 7 or lower. And you're working in 2-week or less sprints. When you're that small, it's hard to go awry and not have someone notice, right? Most of the information that you need to gain, you can gain from looking at the Scrum board when you're using one of those, because that's going to show you what the tasks are that are in process and which ones are done and which ones are still, not yet started. So you can see, okay, we had 5 stories that we took on in this sprint. We've finished 2. 2 others are in process, and one of those is halfway through, another one is only a third of the way through. And the 5th story, we had 2 done, 2 in process, and the 5th story hasn't been started yet. Hasn't even had any work started on it yet. And so if I'm halfway through the sprint, I'm going to look at that and go, yeah, that looks pretty okay. I might be concerned about the one that hasn't started yet, and maybe that we don't have further progress on the ones that we've got because they have to get all the way through testing. But I can look at that Scrum board in a 7-member team that's only working in 2-week sprints and get a really good idea of where we're at. Now, let's change that up. Let's still have that 7-member team, but let's move to what Scrum actually calls for in the Scrum Guide, in the original books about Scrum that Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland wrote. They call for a 4-week or a 30-day, actually, 30-day sprint. So a 30-day sprint is very different, and it needs something like the Scrum, like the Burndown, in order to know when you're off track. See, the reason that a lot of Agile coaches like myself have a preference for shorter sprints, one of the reasons is that shorter sprints leave you less time to go off track, right? And I would also add to that at this point that they leave you less opportunity to obfuscate the off-trackness, right? To hide the fact that you're off track. Not that I think people necessarily often, though sometimes they do, people necessarily often intentionally give misinformation. However, I do believe that sometimes people are optimists, right? We're all optimists. Optimists like to see things from the positive, right? So they're going to see the work that they have ahead of them and think, you know what, I can still do this. Yeah, I know I turned over that rock over there, and that simple if then else clause turned into a nasty hairy algorithm, but without being forced to estimate the hours, I think I can still do it. Well, they may be off by a little, and somebody else is off by a little, and somebody else is off by a little, and everybody's off by a little, which makes the whole project off by a lot. And that could be a very serious problem. So on a 30-day sprint, I would definitely use a burn down because that's going to force the team to keep updating, and it's going to make visible any potential slides or off-trackness that happens with the team, because I know that things happen, right? And when you have a 4-week iteration or a 30-day iteration, it makes it harder to recover from a misstep. See, if you have a 2-week iteration, and that means you have 2 weeks before you feedback to your customer, right? Remember that first drawing? If in that 2 weeks you get feedback from your customer and find out that what you created was wrong, or you've had misinformation about the intention or something of the intention of the customer or the intention of that particular story, you thought it was supposed to do this, and it was really supposed to do that. You read horsepower and you put horses on it. What they really meant was the engine should be strong, right? So you find out within 2 weeks. If you have a 4-week iteration, then you have 4 weeks before you get that kind of real clear feedback. You should be getting feedback all along, don't get me wrong. But really doing a full-on demo for your customer at the end of a 4-week iteration, then you find out you've done something wrong. Then you go and try and correct it in the next sprint. Then you have 4 weeks to find out if what you corrected was right. And then you get the feedback and says, yes, it was, or no, you're still a little bit off. So now you've spent 2 months developing and are still off. If in my 2-week iteration I get some feedback, I haven't developed very much for one thing, and then I have 2 weeks then to find out if what I did wrong was right, that's just 4 weeks, and I've had my feedback, which is that 4 weeks is the same as if you had a 30-day iteration when you first got the feedback. So in the time it takes the 30-day iteration to get this initial feedback, I have in my 2-week iterations gotten initial feedback and made corrections. So I think it's definitely better to go with smaller iterations for that reason. But in those smaller iterations, I am inclined to not use the burn down as long as the team is vigilant about using and maintaining their Scrum board. If they are not using and maintaining that Scrum board, then no one outside of the people who are just working on the project directly has an idea, and even often those people don't have an idea of where you are in your progress towards being done. And that's something that Scrum and all the Agile techniques are trying to give visibility and clarity to, that yes, I can see and I know that I am done with these things. And yes, we're on track to get these things out in the period of time that we'd expected. So that is what burn down is, and the value that you can get from a burn down chart. You can see when you're off track, and product owners and other management folks can see when you're off track. And when not to use burn down, I definitely think these days, and I I'm always amazed by how dumb I was yesterday. But I have proposed to people that they have to use the Burndown, even when you are a 2-week sprint. And now I'm saying, you know what? As long as you're vigilant about the Scrum board, you don't really need to use the Burndown. And so that's my 2 cents on burning or not burning. And the last little bit I wanted to talk today about was something that I've known, and maybe you've known, but it just got back to light to me in the past couple days as I've been doing some coaching with some folks. It's so important that you, as a coach, if you are a coach, or the coach that you're working with, is curious and listens. They need to be curious and they need to listen more than they need to be smart and talk, right? It's great that a person has experience, and that's critically important if you're providing agile coaching. But I'm more interested in someone who's curious. I just found myself the other day feeling a little tense in a project coaching situation where I felt like the client was wanting me to provide advice and tell them exactly what to do. And I was feeling that inside, and I became aware of that. So, started to think about that, and I reminded myself, no, just be curious. You don't need to answer the world's problems. You need to be curious about what's happening here. And I found when I made that mind shift that it really opened up, and it was probably one of the best group coaching sessions that I've had with this particular client today. It was wonderful, really a wonderful time, because I wasn't trying to answer the world's questions. Right? I can't solve world peace, but I can be curious about you, about what you're doing, and about how might we improve that. Not I improve that, but we improve that. I'm always wanting to get better and improve on things, and just was wanting to be curious again about what's going on. And so that was, I'll leave you with that thought that if you are in the middle of trying to help an organization, even if you're not a coach or anything, you're just trying to do Scrum or Lean or Agile techniques within your organization, and you're struggling trying to get people to do it the way you want them to do it, or get them to adopt Scrum, step back, take a deep breath, and start asking questions. And not just like probing and I'm going to grill you. No. Curious questions. Questions of, I wonder why I got that way. I wonder what purpose that served. And is it still serving that purpose, whatever it is, right? Is it, if it's a report, or if it's a meeting, or if it's some kind of documentation, at some point someone, hopefully, thought that provided some value. And maybe it's not providing that same value anymore. You should consider getting rid of it at that point. Or maybe it is, and then maybe you could consider keeping it. Maybe keeping a high-level requirements document is still important. Maybe that through that process, though, you'd say, yeah, but maybe it should be a slightly different one. What should that document look like if we're moving forward, right? That was created at that time for its needs. What are my current needs? What can I do now? So I'll leave you with that. Be curious. Be interested. Ask questions. What is it that this is about, and how can I help this team, these people, become more agile? I'll leave you with a quote that I heard last night at my kindergartners' curriculum night. They were, taking us through, it was like open house at the school, and they shared a quote with us before they sent us off to the classrooms to talk to teachers. And that quote I've modified, and I'm saying, I could not possibly teach you all there is to know about about Scrum or about Agile, Lean. There's too much. There's too much to know, but I can teach you and want to teach you how to think Lean, how to think Agile, because then you have the tools to do it yourself. All right. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in. I will do what I can to answer your questions, but that's the bulk of my content for the session today. Someone said, do you have an example of a digital Scrum board? Sure, you can go to version1.com or rallydev.com, and those are two pretty common tools that people use for doing a Scrum board online. I've used them with distributed teams quite a bit. I recommend people, though, use paper whenever possible. So if you're starting with a team, or you're just getting started with working with Agile, and your team is all in one location, stay on paper as long as you possibly can, especially when you're first starting, because you don't even know what you need from an online tool, so why would you go there yet? So I would encourage you, Jim, if you're James, I guess, I don't know if it's James or Jim, if your team is all in one location, stick to paper, stick to sticky notes and a Scrum wall, because there's something very satisfying, visceral about moving that sticky note from doing to done, from in process to done. People love that motion, that feeling. So that's that. How about others? Do you have questions? What questions do we have? A lot of familiar names on here. Good to see you. Richard, I can take you off mute. Do you want? Are you there, Richard?
Oh no.
I can hear you.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the past, when I've given estimates on durations, typically I've been extremely optimistic, and as a PM, that always irks me when I screw up so badly, and then I have to apologize publicly, and then it comes back in performance. And when I try to balance, and when I try to add in padding and so forth to try and overcome my own tendency, others then kick in and say, that seems too long, why can't you pull it back, things like that. And I'm going like, well, no, this is probably, given my historic optimistic expectations, I think this is actually going to be a little more realistic. I don't want to fall back on the thing saying basically that I don't want to say that my previous it's possible to be doing it in this soon, because I don't want to set up I don't want to set up I don't want to set up my team for failure, basically, and I don't mind coming in underestimate. What's kind of the best way that you've seen to be able to justify padding out estimates, basically?
A couple of different things.
Without exposing that you're padding internally in your own mind.
Well, okay, couple of different things. I'm actually going to put you back on mute so we don't have feedback. But raise your hand if you have another thing to add to this. So, couple of thoughts. As a starting point, you should never be doing the estimates. Right? As the project manager, you're a facilitator of other people doing the work. And so in my both Agile and pre-Agile experience, I never did estimates myself. I have the team do those estimates. Additionally, we don't, in an Agile environment, we don't actually use hours to estimate long range, right? Remember, I was talking this whole time about how the hours were used in the 2 weeks or up to 4 weeks that are right in front of me, right? So your team, and it's not you doing it, but your team can be pretty accurate. Now, the first time you do it, or the second and third time you do it, you'll find them like totally padding things and making it really big. But that's okay, see, because what will happen is if you're using Scrum, for example, I'm working with a team right now. and they overestimated several pieces of work. And that's okay. We said, great, so there's what you can take on. But then they got through it, right? They got through it in the sprint. And so what they do, they're looking around and like, okay, I'm done. I need something to do. They get bored really quick because people are smart, right? They don't want to just sit on their hands. They might for like half a day, but then they're totally bored. And what they did was they then went and pulled in more work. Now, it was uncommitted work, right? The whole team wasn't committed to finishing it, but the people who had time available were taking that work in and working on it to get the team a little bit ahead. So it helped them be able to move forward a little bit without like stopping. And their over-padded estimate, well, it became a reality that they did more than that because they did more than that, right? So when the time actually came, they were able to pull this extra work in and get it done. So that's my advice would be, if you're working in an Agile project, you use points to estimate the backlog of work, all the work that needs to be done here in the near future. And then time becomes a function, an F of X kind of piece of work, where you take the number of points you have in the backlog or the release times your velocity, the team's velocity. So if they have a historical basis, which they won't to begin with, but after 3 or 4 sprints, they've got a historical basis that you can say, okay, this team typically does 50 points per sprint. I have 400 points of backlog work. Therefore, I know that they are going to get done in 8 sprints. I think I did math in public just now. I hope that worked out. But basically, you divide the number of points by the velocity, and that gives you the duration. The great thing about this is that number is going to change, right? If you're working on a big project, if you estimate the backlog and you estimate a guessed velocity to begin with, you're going to have some number, and it's going to say 35 iterations, and you're going to get 5 or 6 iterations into it, and you'll have a better estimate of velocity. It'll either be higher, like the team can do more, like my team that was on this coaching project, that they're able to do more than they originally thought. Excellent. Or it'll be lower. Maybe they were overly optimistic if you can't get all that work done. So you will have a better number. And then on every sprint, you're able to then share with whoever's interested the new estimates. Now, I wouldn't share it up too far up the chain because executives don't like a lot of shifting and changing, as you all know. But you can share it with immediate management, product owner, those kinds of people to say, hey, this is what our velocity is current. It currently looks like it is a 400-point sort or 400-point release, and given our current velocity, this is our current delivery date. Or flipping that around, our team appears to be able to do 50 points per iteration, so we're then able to consume 800 points by the release date. That means it's these stories, those down there, the 800, 900, 700, 900, 1,000, all those fall off, right? We're not able to get to those this iteration, but we will get to them in the next release, right? So I hope that makes some sense. Was that useful to you, Rich?
Yes, yeah, that was actually very helpful. Thanks. And coming back to the point discussion definitely gives me a better justification on that. Tying in with justification, I've also had, and this is especially true with outsourced development teams that I've noticed, and especially on my last project. And the outsource is actually an offshore development group, and they wanted to look very good in their velocity, and they were absolutely horrible in terms of estimating velocity. Is coming back to basically past performance the best way to challenge them on their own internal estimates in terms of velocity? Okay.
Yeah, I tend to, and this is best practice, that you use the last 3 or 4 sprint velocities as the, take an average across that. That's probably about what you're going to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically the team is just truly awful in terms of when it comes to basically that, and then the other problem is that the team is they have extreme breadth of experience, and the problem is like every week is like a different project with them. So and so the problem is like we can't really use previous experience. I just know that from prior instances, that team, they're not going to catch everything basically in testing. It was almost guaranteed that they're going to miss something in testing and so forth. And there's kind of a problem that we have in terms of getting them to do best practices in terms of even just documenting their tests is an uphill battle with them. So okay, and that definitely helps me out just in terms of good to go, basically, of tying the experience back to either their own estimates or their own demonstrated performance. Great.
Exactly.
Thank you.
That's what I would do. You bet.
Right.
All right. Are there other folks with questions? This is fun. I love doing this Q&A part of these calls. So I know it's like quarter till, so people are probably wanting to move on to the next part of their life. Any other questions? Nobody. Tom, any questions? Susie? Linda? Laura? James? Any questions? Lots of people on here. Love it. All right. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for coming. And if you have some suggestions of topics that you'd like to see in the future, like we were just talking with Rich about estimating and points and that kind of thing and how that all works. If you have suggestions for topics that you'd like to have covered in more depth, give me an email, and I'm happy to go over those with everyone on the next call in October. Can you believe it? September is here and upon us, and the next webinar we'll do will be in October. All right. Ooh, someone's asking about scrums. Okay, I'll talk about that because I have some strong opinions. Okay, everyone. Thanks for calling. Bye-bye.